Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this Encompass Policy Summit panel on Mapping a Faster Future for Rural America, an in-depth look at the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund and Phase 1 auction. My name is Christopher Shipley. I'm an attorney and policy advisor at Encompass. I'm excited to be joined today by several Encompass members that have participated in the auction and who will bring their unique perspectives to today's topic, including Brian Regan, Vice President of Legal, Policy, and Strategy for Starry, Brian Worthen, CEO of Mammoth Networks, and Daniel Friesen, the co-founder and Chief Innovation Officer for IdeaTek. In August of 2019, the FCC announced its intention to establish the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund with the intention of directing $20.4 billion over 10 years to expand broadband in rural areas. By January of 2020, the Commission had adopted the RDOF report and order, which established a framework for the program and a timeline for its two-phase auction structure. In October of 2020, the FCC initiated the first phase of the RDOF through a reverse auction, much like that used for the Connect America Phase 2 auction. The first auction wrapped up in November, and though $16 billion was made available, the FCC subsequently announced that it had awarded 180 winning bidders with support totaling $9.23 billion and covering approximately 5.2 million locations in 49 states and 1 territory. Phase 2 of the program will make at least $4.4 billion available to target partially served areas, though it remains to be seen what the Commission will do with the $7 billion that was not allocated through Phase 1. As we've advocated, extending the power of broadband to rural communities depends on our nation's ability to effectively use better data and maps to set faster speed goals that encourage new network growth. The recent RDOF auction results have generated a great deal of interest. Some people would say controversy. So I'm thrilled that our panelists are here to discuss the program and to explore what steps are needed to ensure faster deployment and future success. Brian, Daniel, Brian, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. Let's get started. Want to talk first about your participation in the RDOF auctions. So to provide some perspective for those viewing the panel today, can you share some background on your company's involvement in the RDOF process? And to the extent that you're willing, just sort of talk a little bit about your participation in the auction, how the experience compared with other previous auctions that you might have participated in. Let's start with Brian Worthen.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, we participated in the Rocky Mountains and bid on a 3-state region. We had not had experience previously. We did bid in CAF 2, but when we saw the trend in the bidding of CAF 2, we withdrew at a certain round. In RDOF, we've committed to certain areas within our footprint, and we took an approach of bidding at a strategic level, not necessarily an ROI level. And I think there'll be some discussion about that later. But as a whole, I can report, and I'm happy to say that the FCC auction process is very refined, and they've done a good job. Their platform is phenomenal, and there were no hiccups with that process. So it was an exciting auction, and like you said, there's quite a bit of attention when you're talking about $16 billion. I think it was an extension of CAF, and there's been more equity involvement, I believe, in this auction based on what I've seen from the winners. And so the attention that it brought to rural America was the exciting part for us. But also there too, the awards have me scratching my head, and we can talk about that further. But we were involved at a 3-state level. We took a strategic view of this, and we were recipients or awarded.
Daniel, Thanks, Brian. Daniel, what was IdeaTek's experience like?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So, IdeaTek is a fiber broadband builder in Kansas. Built about 3,000 miles of fiber all over the state. So we did bid at, or we did have our application was both wireless at 100 meg and we focused on fiber at 1 gig, and in the end, um, the entire state of Kansas was awarded at the gig level, so the 100 meg levels weren't even at play. Just a little more background about where we were in CAF 2 and where we ended up in RDOF. In CAF 2, we were the only substantial fiber builder to win at the gig level in Kansas, and we won about $6.2 million over 10 years for about 2,400 premises in South Central Kansas. And so we were looking forward to kind of building on that with RDOF, and certainly had a plan and saw the money there to do significant amounts of investment in fiber in the state of Kansas. I think we from our perspective focused solely on Kansas because that's what we know, and that's where we live. And we had kind of targeted roughly half of the funding, and as Brian said, we were scratching our heads through the process and rode the auction down a long ways. Certainly way lower than you could successfully build fiber to, and so it sounds like we'll get some opportunity to talk about that further. But we won just a little bit of award in the state. It was kind of a token amount that kind of fell off on some fringes, and so we really weren't a major awardee in RDOF. Obviously disappointing for us, but excited for the opportunity to talk about it here today.
Sure. Thanks, Daniel. Brian, so Starry is a fixed wireless provider. Why don't you talk a little bit about your participation in the auction?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and appreciate the opportunity to participate on the panel and in this discussion today. So Starry's mission from the beginning is to connect as many people in the country to better broadband as possible. We started in 2014 by taking a look at ways that we could reduce the cost of last mile broadband, and are able to do that by developing our own fixed wireless equipment ecosystem and using licensed millimeter wave spectrum. So we've got a cost advantage that we think exists primarily because of this vertical integration that we have between developing our own equipment, which is super robust in gigabit, and deploying it on our own network and providing service to customers ourselves. We've got a licensed footprint in 24 gigahertz that covers or touches 29 states and 51 partial economic areas. It's about 60 million pops in total. So a very substantial kind of spectrum footprint on which we intend to build and deploy over the next decade as we build out our network and meet our service obligations under the terms of those licenses, and really fundamentally to bring better broadband to people across the country. We do that today in 6 states plus the District of Columbia, have a network that covers millions of households already, and have a focus on digital equity as part of what we're doing. So we've got a program called Starry Connect, which is focused specifically on residents of affordable housing, both public and private. So we've developed these unique relationships with public and private affordable housing owners, in which we deploy service to the residents in those buildings. It's really robust service. It's 30 meg symmetrical for $15 a month. And that's really part and parcel of Starry's mission to connect people to better broadband. We saw the opportunity in RDOF as a unique chance to bring our technology, our unique cost structure, and our customer first service to other parts of the partial economic areas, primarily in which we hold licenses that we may take longer to get to because of the economics of our network falling over time as we develop new technology or improve our technology as we go. And so we took a look at RDOF within our footprint, took a look at the opportunity, did some very aggressive technology and cost modeling, and have a structure we think from a technology and cost perspective that was very efficient going into the auction, and feel good about our opportunity to connect over 100,000 additional locations in 9 states coming out of the auction. So pleased with the results, and are excited about the opportunity to bring our network and our service to additional parts of the country.
Well, I think we've hinted at it a little bit. So I think it's important, I think, to start to get into the announcement of the RDOF results. I think when the commission, announced those results, I think it, you saw a lot of excitement, and you probably saw some equal parts consternation. And I was hoping we could talk just a little bit about that. What were your perceptions of the results? And what, if any, trends, did you notice? And then, also, if you answer sort of what should be done to improve the auctions, results and rules, in the future. So, Daniel, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Chris. That was a lot of questions. I'll try to hit them all. So, as far as, what we saw, and I'm going to speak a little bit from my point of view in Kansas. I think there's a lot of different scenarios that happened all over the United States, and they're not all the same. I think, in the Midwest especially, you saw some very unique bidding strategies, apparently from fixed wireless providers. It's at the gig level, and I think there's, one of the biggest elephants in the room here is bidding at the gig level with from fixed wireless providers assumes that these fixed wireless providers have a technology that can deliver at scale. And so, that was the first kind of observation. But the thing that really hit home in the Midwest that really was surprising was how low the bidding got. And I think there's kind of two categories of arguments here. One is just, there was some unintended consequences that I don't think the FCC knew were going to happen. I mean, clearly, I think their intent was to try to distribute all $16 billion, and we almost, I think, between 50 and 60%. And so that was a unfortunate, I think, but unintended consequence. The other side is kind of, what people are referring to as maybe, suspect intentions or suspect business plans. And so in the Midwest, I think you've got both of those situations, but we are very aggressive bidder, very aggressive in our cost structure for construction of fiber. I feel like we're one of the lowest fiber builder, per mile in the United States. Some of that is just because of where we live and the country we operate in. It's flat and clean dirt, but we couldn't make it work. And the areas that the levels that we dropped out at percentage wise were very low, and then it kept driving lower. And that's where it really got bizarre. As we figured we were bidding against one other aggressive gig provider, and then it became clear that there had to be a different technology in use, because and multiple bidders thinking the same thing. And so in Kansas, for example, we saw two fixed wireless bidders bid the percentage of available funding in a lot of census blocks down below 10%. And clearly at that level, it's almost like, you might as well just do it for free, and why aren't you doing it already? And so, from some general observations as to, what happened in the Midwest, I'd say, I'd say we were just surprised at how low the funding got, and surprised at the implied technology that is required. And at the end of the day, we're confused because we don't see that the market has the type of scalable technology, especially in rural areas with the density requirements, which are very low. We're looking, in Kansas, three premises per square mile, and so when we hear about technology like 60 gigahertz and range restrictions with that, we're very concerned with the rural aspect of these awards.
Daniel, Brian, Regan, what you want to take it next?
Sure, thanks, Chris. I think first and foremost, we should think about it from a broad perspective of generally being a success, right? The result of this is that there are millions of locations across the country that are going to get service that weren't going to get it before, even if there's some failure on the margins, right? Even if there are some people that don't perform or some people that default through the long form process for whatever reason, millions of locations are going to get service where they didn't have it before. And I think it's a success by that metric. I think the commission was pretty clear through the process about what its goals were. And I think it was optimizing both for maximizing the number of locations that did get connected. And unfortunately, there are some places that weren't ultimately won in the auction because they did get bid down too low. And two, I think implicitly there was a thought about the use of the auction mechanism as a means for preserving the budget. And that's the way that a reverse auction works by function. I think what Daniel raised is right in that the commission ultimately approved lots of bidders, and I think Brian mentioned this in the beginning. When the government dangles a $16 billion carrot, a lot of people are going to show up. Hopefully, most of those people are acting in good faith, and I have a lot of faith in the commission's ability to weed out those that are not at the front end and definitely at the back end. But it does encourage a lot of participation at 500 plus applicants going into the short form stage. So I think, the auction was very competitive for sure. Daniel's absolutely right that the price got driven down very low in a lot of circumstances. It was lower than we had expected it to be, and would have liked and preferred to win more than we did, to be honest with you. And in some cases, we weren't the winner against a wireline provider. In most cases, we actually lost to a wireline provider, and there are lots of reasons why people bid in the ways that we do that they do. Whether or not it's cost efficient may or may not be the first metric that people are looking at in terms of how they bid. I think some of it's competitive as well, right? If you've got some opportunity and you're able to structure a model in which you can justify spending money in ways that you may not otherwise have done, or that may not be efficient, for example, to prevent someone else from coming in. I think there's a little bit of that was in play in the auction as well. But overall, I think, we knew what we were getting into on the front end of this. The commission was pretty clear about it. It was definitely more competitive than we had expected. I think it was the most bullish you could have anticipated going into it, for sure. And we're continually surprised as the auction went on and how far the price point was going to get. It was clear after the first couple of rounds that it was going to, clear at 60%, but then how far it went after that, I think, was a little surprising to everyone. But overall, I think, we're happy about the results and excited to bring our service out to more parts of the country.
I think it's just worth clarifying some of the points that you made. The auction itself has sort of a short form application process and a long form application process. And as you mentioned, at the sort of front end, in order to be approved to bid, potential bidders, submitted a short form application. And as you said, there were over 500 of those. And then winning bidders will then have their application reviewed by the FCC. I believe it's no later than January. I think those long-form applications are due at the end of January, so that the commission can continue the review process. Brian, what was Mammoth's experience? Not necessarily during the auction, but sort of what are your reflections now that it's over?
I thought a lot about this, and I would echo something that Brian said, is the reverse auction by nature. The goal is to be as smart with money as possible, and that's where the FCC succeeded. there was so much attention drawn, as I mentioned previously, that there were a number of bidders that took an aggressive strategy, and both Daniel and Brian used that word, and so I'll use that word. And in that aspect, it's a success. And the goal is to get rural America and the most remote areas funded. So if you think about CAF2 funded the towns, not the cities, but the towns, and what I would say is below mid-tier markets. And RDOF round one, I would call it as funding the county region. And so that's the interesting part about the bidding and the process as it went through, is everybody started to realize that there are gig bidders out there bidding countywide coverage, and that's very aggressive. And when we're talking about scratching of heads, are folks that are bidding simply looking at the ability to charge maximum ETC rate. So when America reads press on RDOF and gets excited about gigabit to rural and gigabit to their county, is how I'm putting it, are they prepared to pay $140.80, which is the 2021 ETC rate? Or is a provider entering the auction thinking they're going to squat on an area? So that's a strategy discussion. Everybody entering the auction obviously has a different goal. I think what's interesting about this discussion is, and what Starry said is, they've invested in this license frequency. Daniel's talked about 60 gigahertz. Starry's frequency is more deliverable. But what's interesting about this panel is all of us actually are in the wireless game. I own tower infrastructure, and I also build fiber. And so for this group to say we're doing some head scratching, I think is important to relay. My reflection is this, and I would summarize it by saying, handing out 9.23 billion to serve this many areas, I agree, success. The reflection I've come to in the last few weeks is there are other funding mechanisms that hand out funds based on blocks, census blocks that are served. And the FCC is the only entity that really has a map that is reflective of the broadband status in these county areas, in these town areas. And I talk about rural because I'm from a town of 35,000 people. The hazard we have with RDOF, and I'd like to communicate this because I think we can correct that for RDOF phase 2, is what we've done is effectively, as a country, handed out funds to a limited number of folks who now are under the gun to get this built. And if those folks can deliver, fantastic. I love it. If it's delayed or there's some other strategy in play with regards to squatting on an area, I can tell you that that's effective too, because my reflection comes down to this: success handing out 9.23 billion, absolutely. We've now effectively locked down those blocks for any other funding. So when the FCC maps are used for, every provider submits a 477, says this block is served. Now funds are handed out for RDOF phase 1. That block is now considered served. And this is even clearly defined in the HR 133 omnibus bill. If you read through that, it clearly says one location, one residence within a block considers this served. What we don't want to do in this country, and I think as a provider, as a competitive provider, I want to communicate this. What we don't want to do is lock down a block so that future funding in that area is not going to happen, because states rely on those maps. The USDA relies on those maps. And I think that's the reflection I have, is the missed success here is we've now relied on these certain number of awardees to deliver in those areas, and what happens if they don't? That's what happens to rural America in these towns and these counties that during 2020 and 2021 are looking for answers.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the maps and just the commission is carrying out the RDOF auction while it's attempting to meet some of these new requirements for broadband mapping and some of the provisions of the Broadband Data Act. What impact did moving forward before the job is done? I know that they've done considerable work on the Broadband Data Act. Yeah, but what impact did that have on the auction? And did the commission make the right call in sort of moving forward, while still managing the digital opportunity data collection process? Brian, Regan?
Sure. And before I get into that, I want to add to what Brian said. I think in addition, there's an opportunity on a going forward basis to think about not just the binary of whether or not someone is connected, but how well they're connected. In the context of doing additional funding, I think there's a real opportunity to improve the way that people are connected to broadband, either by benchmarking against higher tiers or quality service or whatever, right? I think there's an opportunity to continually look at that as well. On the data side, the commission made a decision to move forward on the RDOF auction with the data it had in front of it. There are certainly issues with that data, I think, as folks have pointed out and did point out during the process, and really the reality of the existence of the Broadband Data Act is a recognition of the fact that the current data is flawed in some ways. I think in the context of RDOF, it was a balance between the commission's desire to move quickly to get this money out versus, the length of time required to improve the mapping associated with it. I think if the data was more precise, the money would be better targeted. I think there's absolutely going to be places in which, the census block or census block group, may or may not have really been or should have been in the auction. And there are places that inversely, are shown to be covered under 477, but really aren't actually covered, right? So you've got this sort of this middle area where either it says it's covered and it's not, or it says it's not covered and probably really is. And people pointing to places like airports and things like that in urban centers that, for whatever reason, just show up as not covered in 477. And I think the SEC did the best it could with what it had under the timing constraint that it had. I think ultimately in an auction when you've got 60,000 plus census block groups and 800,000 census blocks, they're not going to be able to do a full audit on that data. They knew that there were some issues with it, but I think statistically probably determined that those are on the margins and relatively not impactful to the overall state of the auction, and went forward with it in the way that they did. But I do think absolutely in the next auction, there's a huge opportunity to improve the precision of that data, the granularity of that data, and the fidelity of it in a way in which the government can be more confident that it's targeting the money in the most efficient way to the most efficient places to serve Americans.
Yeah. Brian and Dana, before I give you both an opportunity to respond, it's interesting. I think the RDOF results, are being tracked, and particularly to Brian Regan's point about, there sort of having been some reports highlighting, some of the more urban areas and frankly, areas like, parking lots, universities, airports, where there might already be service nearby. In addition to this broadband data question and mapping question, and whether or not the commission, was right to move forward with the auction at this point. Did the commission also miss an opportunity as part of this? Did the commission miss an opportunity to direct more funding to the rural areas? Which is where, then Chairman Pai, indicated that was the focus of the RDOF, to unserved areas here in phase one. Brian?
I think that when you bring that up in the topic of did the FCC connect with the rural America need, I think about the county discussion I had, the town discussion, the areas that RDOF phase one and phase two are designed to improve are the areas where there's really no traditional ROI. And I would answer this a different way by saying, I believe the rural American broadband market is served by rural American providers. And the smaller the provider is, and I look around to other organizations, and I know a number of providers in the Rocky Mountain region and in Nebraska and Kansas and Missouri. The dichotomy here is, and the hurdle we all need to overcome. And I've been telling this to my state broadband advisory council group, and I'm very vocal about this. The smaller the provider, the less they can ensure their mapping is correct, the less thorough they are with their mapping. They might not even be participating. I was in a county planning commission with another provider recently, and I turned to the provider. I said, "You really need to file your 477s. All right, I'm doing you a favor here, and I don't have to do that, right? But I'm going out of my way to point out to people that the small provider that used to be a tower operator for paging or two-way radio, or used to be an electrician that decided to start building fiber, or started partnering with a city or a county, they're still not filing 477s. And so the real dichotomy here is the FCC is operating on these 477 maps that aren't encompassing what's happening in rural America. And those providers' spirits are going to be crushed when money's handed out on top of them. And I can say that for a fact because I during this RDOF process, I ran a test on FCC mapping. The blocks south of my brother's house we've been serving those for years. We've been filing 477s on those for years. CAF2 was handed on in those blocks again. RDOF round 1 was handed out in those blocks again. It's not just the airports and urban areas that Mr. Regan's talking about. The mapping is so insufficient because people aren't out in rural America encouraging these 5 to 25 employee broadband providers to be compliant, and we're leaving them behind. We're going to crush their spirit, and we're going to wind up with a smaller group of broadband builders in the future as a result. That's my concern.
There. Daniel.
Well, I agree with the consensus here. I mean, I think the FCC needs better maps, and they but they needed to get the money out. I think that the events of last year indicate that we are significantly behind, especially in rural America with funding, and so it was the right call to get it out with the best data we have, and I think it's also the right call to get better data out there. I mean, I want to point out that the point of there's funding being put in airports and restaurants, and they're not going to get that funding at the end of I've been through CAF2 and how premise certification works, and the FCC will in the end find that that's not a certifiable location, and they're not going to get funding for it. And so the bidders are responsible for knowing that up front, and if they take money for it, in the end, it's going to get clawed back. So I don't think that's as big an issue as it's being made out to be. But to I think the bigger point is what Brian made, that spirits in rural America are going to get crushed. They were crushed. I mean, I have a very good example of a project we did in southwestern Kansas, and it was over $5 million. It was funded through some CARES Act funding, and I had a state representative down there that has been advocating for investment in his community for years. We always meet him in state capital in Topeka, and when we got $5 million for that area, and we put, in 3 months, we put fiber into 3 towns for his, more than 3 towns in his area, and then we put fixed wireless in the rest. He was livid that we didn't do fiber in the rest, and I thought, man, that's so unfair. But for him to, you know, call me and tell me that. And then I thought about it some more, and I thought, you know, he's right. Like, he should expect that his constituents in the ruralist parts of his area should get the best as everybody else. And that's what we've kind of missed here. And I'm not discounting, you know, the fixed wireless is the fixed wireless operators out there that you know, tried to make a play at this, and if they can do it, that's good. I mean, I'm like both Brian's here. If they can make it work, more power to them. But this has not worked in rural America, and that representative was right when he said, you know, when you put fixed wireless in these rural areas, you're never coming back with fiber. And that's what we're missing. You know, rural America deserves fiber. They just, you know, metro areas either have fiber or they have cable today. Both of them do gig speeds. Both of them have scalability. They don't have significant scalable wireless deployments. And I think from a, you know, just viewing the economics and the market facts, it's strange to me for anybody to be saying that all of a sudden we have a solution for rural America that substantially will be solved with wireless technology. And so I guess my point here is, you know, certainly any technology, any upgrade is better than nothing, but we're going to continue to leave rural America behind until we get them the same infrastructure that urban America has. And right now, it looks like fiber.
Want to give anyone on the panel an opportunity to respond, or?
Yeah, I would just add to that. I don't fundamentally disagree with what Daniel's saying, but would think about it in terms of the level of connectivity people are getting versus the medium by which they are getting it. If the technology is capable of doing it one way or another, well, whether it's a new innovation or not, or however it's doing it, I think the focus really ought to be on the quality of the connection that people are getting, the speeds that they're getting, and more sort of agnostic about the way in which that's ultimately delivered. Obviously, we're fixed wireless operators, so we have views on that. We will and do deploy a lot of fiber along with that. So I think all of us are in the same boat here, where we do fiber networks, we do hybrid networks, we do fixed wireless networks. It's not that one of these is better than the other. It's that if you combine them in a way in which you can reduce the cost of doing it, obviously, as Daniel said, you're going to do that, right? And sometimes that may result in people getting slower speeds based on the technology that you're deploying. But again, I think if you can talk about it in terms of the quality of the connection, the speed of the connection, the latency associated with that connection, and the service that people are getting versus exactly how they're getting it, I think you can get to the same result as ultimately what Jane was asking for.
Yeah. And I wanted to point out what Brian Regan said, and I think Brian Worthen said too, this idea that qualitative information should be a factor in funding, I think is very important, and I think it could be part of the mapping. You know, if you think your provider sucks, like, that might be a very good factor in whether there should be more funding to increase competition, because your provider probably sucks because they don't have competition. And we see that in rural America, especially, where, you know, people have fiber, but they have 10 meg service. Where does that happen other than rural America? And yeah, and we laugh about it, but it's true. And they pay out the nose for it, and they have to buy a phone line. And
it happens in urban America too.
Right.
It's a big problem with incumbents.
Right. And so, to the extent that there is a factor that's qualitative that shows that you know, fundamentally from an economics perspective there isn't enough competition, we should be funding in those areas as well.
And that
Great
comes
talk
back
here
to
at the
I'm sorry, that comes back to the conversation I had about should a provider receiving funding lock down the entire block? Because we want to make sure that the providers receiving funds are not only the best actors, but ultimately we want to open up that block for future programs as well, because competition is what keeps everybody sharp, keeps me sharp. Daniel talked about that as well. The thing we need to avoid is right now people are looking at the original Connect America Fund, the 6 to 7 year program in the towns that mostly were handed out to incumbent Lex, and they built a 10 meg by 1, and that was a 6 to 7 year program. And now people are looking back on that saying, can you believe we funded 10-1? I don't want us to look at RDOF, and I think this is what we can look at for phase 2. I don't want to look back and say, we really funded 25 by 3. And I think that's what Daniel's pointing out when he's talking about this conversation he's having in Kansas. It makes you sit up as a provider and say, yeah, you're right, that we should do better. And every provider should be sitting up and saying that. And that's what these funds should encourage, is a provider to say, hey, halfway through RDOF, you're going to take 25/3 to 100 by 10. And that's the stuff we should learn from this and change for phase 2.
Straight talk here at the Encompass 2021 Policy Summit. Now, this is great. One thing I sort of ask everyone to respond to, what we're seeing from the Hill now, right? There's been a lot of congressional interest, obviously, in the RDOF, essentially asking that the commission now review the long forms and ensure that all the winning bidders have, hold on, let me get this, the technical, financial, managerial, operational skills, capability, and resources to deliver the services that they pledged for the Americans within their service area. Wanted to get your all's feedback on that call for the commission to ensure that the long form application review process is thorough, and even that it encouraged even public comment. They encouraged public comment, or the commission to seek public comment. I want to get your everyone's feedback on the sort of oversight role that Congress is playing now, and their desire to sort of see the commission ensure that that the winning bidders can deliver what they promised.
I can jump in first here, Chris. I think that the FCC staff is incredibly skilled and talented and capable of doing an objective fact-based analysis on people's applications. I think they did it at the short form stage, and I think they're going to do it again at the long form stage. They're never going to be able to perfectly predict who's going to be successful or who's not going to be successful in this, right? They're going to do the best they can based upon the information they have in front of them. And as a practical matter, no one's going to be able to predict the future in terms of someone else's ability to deploy a technology or operate their business in an effective and efficient manner. And we've seen that from large, high cost participants in the past, right? A number of them have gone bankrupt. That's not something the commission can predict or protect against necessarily, except in the ways that it has by requiring letters of credit and things like that. So the commission and ultimately the American public can be made whole in the event that someone defaults on that. So I certainly get the push to make sure that the commission is doing its job, but I have every bit of faith that the staff is going to engage in a very objective, very fact-based analysis. I can tell you from personal experience, they were incredibly detailed and thorough on the short form stage. They did reject, 100+ applications. And I have every expectation that they're going to do it again on the bad form stage. And I said this before, and as Brian pointed out, you dangle a $16 billion carrot, you're going to get some people that are potentially bad actors. And I think the commission has the skills, the people, the staff, the expertise to figure out who those people are and to weed them out of the process if they didn't catch them on the short form stage, do it on the long form stage. So certainly understand it, but I think the commission is super capable of doing the work to make the decisions that it needs to make. And then in terms of public comment, I think the fact of the matter is that auction participants give the commission an incredible amount of confidential proprietary information, and that's the basis on which they're making these decisions. You could solicit public comment not on that information. It's not going to be that instructive to the commission, because the people that are providing public comment are not going to have the right level of information to really do an objective analysis of someone else's financial model or someone else's technology in a robust way. And I obviously very much don't think the commission should release that confidential information to the public. That would be a huge disincentive to people participating in the program.
We're coming close to the end of our time here, but Brian and Daniel, I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to that before I sort of wrap up with one final question.
Yeah, I can go next. I mean, Brian Regan's makes some good points. Nobody wants their financial model or proprietary information placed in the public eye. I think, and it's not really fair to have a trial by mob here for the applicants. I think what we have seen through some, ex parte letters to the commission, I think that's helpful. I think they're raising helpful points. I think if there was one point of transparency that I think would be helpful, is to the extent that there's technology that's being used that's not proprietary. I think it would be worth the commission's time to have a public conversation or allow conversation and input from providers that are operating in this space to comment on technologies that others claim they may be using, and I think that would be a good way to get true and accurate market information to what works and what doesn't. I mean, Brian's my go-to as far as all the different wireless technologies. They've tried about all of them, and he's the one telling me that scalable gig and rural does not work today. And so absent a hidden proprietary technology, this stuff should be pretty visible to the public, and the public should be told if generally available technology is being used. I think that would be worth a conversation. But I agree, you don't want to get into the business case and the financial information. I think there is a point that I saw in CAF 2 that has a potential to happen in RDOF, where you have the really technical people and you have the really financial focused people, and there's probably less that put the two together. I mean, that's what we do as business people. I think from an analyst perspective, that's a little harder. And I think we saw in CAF 2, 100 meg bidders at the time, almost 5 years ago, 100 meg was hard to do with wireless. And I think you saw, somebody saying, see, look, it works, 100 meg. And it did work in a certain scenario and in a certain environment. And I think that's what we have today. And that's why gig wireless passed the test. But you have to, interpolate that into the business model. And then you got to scale it for 10 years and look what 10 years worth of demand and increased demand is going to do to that model. And I think maybe that was missed a little in CAF 2 with certain models. I think that's probably the risk associated with the analysis here is that, and I think that's why fixed wireless bidders were awarded an opportunity in the gig phase and approved, because you can prove it that it does work at gig by 500 in certain scenarios. And it wasn't the FCC's job in short form to determine where the applicant's going to use that technology and where they're going to use something like fiber. But it is now in the long form their job, in my opinion, to determine whether that's feasible. And you can't, again, in my opinion, assume that you can just use this gig wireless in every application and make gig work. And so I think a strong vetting of where finance and technology meet could avoid, you know, a really bad outcome for America, you know, in the next 5 to 10 years as this funding is utilized.
I think we're having this discussion because everybody's having this discussion about RDOF. I would close by saying the areas that the funding is going to had no return on investment on their own. Otherwise, somebody would have already done it. But we have to look back at DSL and how irrelevant that became over last year. There's no way we could be having this Zoom call over a DSL upload. The need for the vetting is important, and the reason why is, had RDOF handed this out to 3 times as many providers, there's a more probability that more networks going to be built. But the results lying in the hands of a few make this more important. And this isn't us looking over the fence. This is and I think what we're discussing here is we're all observing this because this ecosystem is so small. I will be answerable to my state legislators because they turn to me for answers, just like Daniel experiences in Kansas. I experienced the same thing in Wyoming. I will have broadband offices and legislators and county commissioners asking me what happened to my area. Why didn't the provider deliver? And those are discussions I had to be prepared for. And that's what I want to point out today is I want to make sure that this whole ecosystem performs as intended.
I've got time for one more question, lightning round. If you could have, an elevator ride with the head of the RDOF auctions task force, what would be your one quick recommendation for what to do with respect to RDOF Phase 2? We'll start with Brian Worthen, we'll go Daniel, and then Brian.
My elevator pitch is simple. Are we future-proofing America? And are we in 10 years going to look back on this and say, why did we fund 25.3? Let's look to that for RDOF Round 2.
Perfect. Daniel.
You know, if I had one thing to ask them, I think, you know, I think it goes back to what I said. I think at the end of the day, we need to look at it as a whole business case. You know, if we look at it just from the technical side, if we just look at it just from the financial side, I think we're going to lose. But if we look at it together, I trust they've got the capability, like Brian Regan said, to handle this and to get it right. And so we just need to get it right for America and for all of the money at stake here. So that would be what I'd ask.
Perfect. And then Brian?
I'd ask that they focus on the areas that really need better broadband, not just areas that don't have broadband today, but areas that have really poor broadband, whether they're urban or rural is irrelevant, and focus on the places in which people really genuinely need better connectivity. I think as Brian pointed out, and Daniel's mentioned too, COVID has highlighted how bad internet can be in certain circumstances, and the need for really good, robust broadband that goes way beyond 25.3. And there are lots of areas in the country that don't have it today. I would urge the commission to look at those and things that they can do outside of RDOF to improve that as well.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. This was an excellent discussion, and really appreciate you all making yourselves available for the Policy Summit and to have this kind of conversation about RDOF. I think there's clearly a lot to come, and Encompass will continue to monitor RDOF and provide updates to its members as necessary. But thank you all so much. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.